And if the glands are blocked or atrophied, then we could talk about not completely atrophied, but some atrophy. You might say, okay, well, how do I know the glands are blocked? Well, if you're measuring that blockage with a meibomian gland expressor or meibomian gland evaluator, or the glands have some atrophy but not all complete atrophy, then you could think about LipiFlow, TearCare, iLux, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, depending on what you have in your office and what that patient specifically needs. So I think. Hello and welcome to the Chris Wolfe Podcast on iCode Media. Today, I wanted to talk a little bit about pairing the diagnosis or pairing the right treatment with the right signs and symptoms related to dry eye. So we're going to talk about dry eye today, but not in the what's the newest drop kind of way. We're going to talk about how we make better treatment decisions, structure the clarity and the confidence that comes from knowing what we're treating and why we're treating it. The most common questions I get include, what ophthalmological codes or evaluation and management codes should I use? What ICD-10 codes do I need to bill with this CPT code? What CPT codes can be billed together and what can't? And my favorite, how do I manage a patient who has diabetes who comes in for a quote-unquote routine eye exam? These questions really highlight the confusion and uncertainty that serves as a daunting hurdle for providers, makes it more challenging for them to care for their patients and provide those patients with the best opportunity for a lifetime of ocular health and clear vision. That's why we built iCode Education, for this specific purpose. Our mission is to provide optometrists with resources to help you understand disease states, revenue cycles, and billing and coding so that you can put that on autopilot and truly care for your patients. Check out iCodeEducation.com. That's EYECODE education.com. We've developed a premier billing and coding bundle that includes all of our billing and coding resources in one place. We also have a 10% discount code just for listeners of this podcast. Enter the coupon code EYECODEMEDIA22 at checkout. We'd love to work with you. Check out iCodeEducation.com. Hello, dedicated optometrists. Are you looking for a way to support your patient's vision and overall eye health? Let me introduce you to Vision Edge Pro, a visual performance supplement that stands out in our profession. Vision Edge Pro contains a balanced blend of mesozeaxanthine, lutein, and zeaxanthine in a 10-10-2 ratio. This combination has been scientifically shown to increase macular pigment density, which enhances visual performance, including contrast sensitivity and vision in glare situations. Additionally, Vision Edge Pro provides 300 milligrams of DHA and EPA, fulfilling the daily requirements for omega-3s as recognized by the leading health organizations. This ensures your patients receive the essential nutrients their eyes need for optimal health. Whether it's for everyday screen use, night driving, or enjoying the outdoors, Vision Edge Pro supports your patients in seeing their best. Recommend Vision Edge Pro for your patients today and help them achieve clearer, healthier vision. Contact your local MacuHealth representative for more details. Vision Edge Pro, because your patients deserve the best in eye health. Go to MacuHealth.com and use the coupon code PODCAST2024 at checkout for special discounts. We'll walk through how we're thinking about Xiidra or Tripteer or XDEMVY, MIEBO, cyclosporins, and more, IPL as well, but always through the lens of matching the treatment with the cause. And really this came up years ago. Actually, Cheryl Chapman and I have had a discussion on this podcast years ago when we were trying to match and articulate how we're going to approach different dry eye scenarios as opposed to kind of across the board treatment. And then even when we developed the Vision Source dry eye protocol, that was probably 2019, I believe. We were trying to do this and articulate this across the board, but we still see this as a problem today. And fortunately, DEWS 2 has recently come out, DEWS 3 has recently come out, and they basically do the same thing. They advocate for the same thing by finding the underlying cause of dry eye and then matching a treatment to that underlying cause. And that's what I want to unpack today, because there's a lot of uncertainty and a lot of confusion in this space about when I go to consult with different practices to say, that these practices are sort of picking the newest thing. And I talked about this on a podcast before, kind of related to, aesthetics and dry eye and marketing and those sorts of things. But it can be a real challenge for providers, and I don't blame them. I get caught in the same sort of thinking often. It's the thing that I'm most recently concerned about, whether it's I just bought an IPL, or I just bought a low-level light therapy, or I just had the Triptyr or the Extemvi or the Mibo rep come into my office. And this is not a dog against any one of those things. It's just that if we don't have good clarity about what we're treating and why we're treating them, then it can lead to this uncertainty. And so that's what I want to kind of break down today. So as always, be sure to subscribe to the podcast, write a review, share it with your friends, and support those who support us. So I think the perspective is that dry eye just isn't one disease. We know this, and if we're honest, it's easy to fall in the habit of treating it like it is. A new drug comes out, so let's give it a shot. A patient complains of burning, well, here's a new drop. But when we do that, we skip the diagnostic step, especially if this occurs at the comprehensive exam. We lose the opportunity to practice medicine. And before we talk about drops or devices, we always want to start with, I think the bottom line is the perspective of, is this aqueous deficient or is this evaporative? Is this mucus deficient? Is there inflammation present? Do we see signs of Demodex? It doesn't take a ton of time to do this, but it does take structure. And that's the foundation that DEWS 2 laid out with stepwise care. And it's also that DEWS 3 has expanded upon that, reminding us to match the treatment to the underlying cause, not just the symptom severity. So in our clinic, step 1 therapy isn't a formally broken down evaluation for the patient. It's the base of everything else. So we start with saying, listen, step 1 therapy, we can easily administer that at the comprehensive exam. In my practice, I believe it because most patients, so again, if we're going to break this down, I ask myself and I ask the practices that I consult with, what do you think is the most concerning issue or the most likely underlying cause of this patient's problems? Are there treatments you can do to try to wipe the slate clean for the easy stuff? And in my practice, what I believe it is most of the time it's related to the eyelids. So it's mostly related to underlying MGD. And if I can make that better, at least I'm taking a step in the right direction. That doesn't mean there isn't inflammation. It doesn't mean there isn't mucus deficiency. It doesn't mean there isn't even aqueous deficiency. But I know likely there's an evaporative cause. And if I'm trying to administer a broad treatment at the comprehensive exam that doesn't require a ton of my differential diagnosis, then I start with warm compresses and lid hygiene. Now, I know we can make the case of whether or not patients are going to do warm compresses, but I think the bottom line is it makes it very simple for me to administer. And then if they're not doing them, we can take additional steps, or if they're not effective. Occasionally, you could use artificial tears at this point. And if you really believe in it, then you ought to put artificial tears in at this point as well. What matters most is the consistency. I think patients struggle with the consistency. And I've found that when we give patients a system for lid hygiene, something that they can track and follow, they're more likely to stick with it, whether that's tea tree oil product or an app that supports habit building, or even just regular follow-up and reminders. It tends to matter for patients. And I think that if we fail in this step and we've documented what we've tried well, then we're in a much better position to escalate that care, not just from an insurance perspective, but from a clinical confidence perspective. So I want to walk through how I break it down in my practice and where each medication or modality fits in. So first, let's address inflammation. If the problem's inflammation, you'll see staining, redness, telangiectasia, maybe MMP9 elevation if you're using that treatment. And so Xiidra might be a medication that will help. Maybe it's even better for faster ocular surface inflammation relief. Maybe if we want to get even faster and more potent, we might use a topical steroid before Xiidra. Cyclosporins like Restasis, Cequa, Vive are slower to act, but often better tolerated for longer-term control. Again, in my estimation. Also, treatments, patients who are averse to topical medications or long-term topical medications would do really well, obviously, if they have telangiectatic vessels with a treatment pulse like IPL. And so this is kind of how we think about this, is we get to match treatments for that problem, and then we get to serve the patient based on what their preference for treatment is. So I always tell patients, or I often tell patients, that I'm kind of agnostic to what the underlying or what the treatment is, right? Like obviously there is some financial benefit that we have in our practice for IPLs and other procedure-based treatments. But like if they have a preference for topical medications that they're going to use every day, then we can find a topical medication that will help them control inflammation. CooperVision and the AOA have joined forces in a groundbreaking initiative to transform how optometrists treat children with myopia. The Myopia Collective aims to unite our profession and its allies to challenge the status quo and elevate the standard of care for children with myopia. Everyone is invited to become a member of the collective. By joining, you pledge to act in slowing childhood myopia progression. Membership includes regular updates and information about the collective's efforts, access to educational opportunities and resources, and insights from the ambassador optometrists who advocate for community policy and changes supporting the collective's mission. Click the link in the show notes to join the collective today. If you're ready to stop feeling overwhelmed and start running a safer, more profitable practice, here's the next step. First, book a strategy call with us, Practice Performance Partners. We'll uncover the biggest risks and opportunities in your practice. Then, choose the package that fits your goals. From there, we'll get you launched with confidence, with clear systems, with expert support, and with peace of mind, knowing your practice is protected and set up to grow. Don't wait until something goes wrong. Book your strategy call with us, Practice Performance Partners, today. If they prefer treatment options, office-based treatment options, we have that as well. And obviously then we think about meibomian gland dysfunction. If it's part of the inflammation, we'll often think about, well, can we do treatments that will impact the meibomian glands, like dietary support, like omega-3s, right? MacuHealth has TG3 based formulation that we use for our protocols. Sometimes we need something more potent if we're thinking about oral medications. So we might think about doxycycline, right? So if a patient prefers an oral treatment and to a procedure-based treatment, we could use something like an omega-3 or oral doxycycline. Low dose, 50 milligrams once a day for 3 to 5 months. Actually, there's a lot of studies that support that for meibomian gland dysfunction. And so, I think that having that perspective is very helpful. And in cases of chronic inflammatory and meibomian gland dysfunction, obviously that's where we start looking at IPL for procedures. Some patients just aren't going to do well on a daily drop or an oral medication. And if we can reduce inflammation with a series of IPL sessions, that's a win. So for aqueous deficiency, for patients who are underproducing tears but don't show much inflammation, something like Lacrophil gel or Tripteer. These are, again, I'm mentioning these because they're kind of right on everybody's radar screen because they're being advertised a lot. So I'm purely just mentioning them because they're around, but punctal occlusion would be in that same realm. So these are good starting points. If there's not a lot of inflammation, it tends to give quicker relief than other topical anti-inflammatories. But again, if somebody has poor compliance or isn't thrilled about using daily meds like a Tripteer, then we might move toward a punctal occlusion using a collagen plug or a silicone plug or Lacrophil gel, depending on what your preference is and what do you think clinically is the most efficacious. Depending on the overall picture, we might think about systemic inflammation, nutrition, lifestyles. Omega-3s, again, may be appropriate in terms of aqueous deficiency. And then we think about evaporative dry eye. This is where you may use a medication like Mibo, but if the patient still has glandular structure, you might use other expression-based devices, procedural devices, especially if there's structure and meaning their meibography doesn't show complete atrophy, and the patient prefers a a treatment option or a procedural option, you might use, any of the number of devices that we can express, the oil glands with. So think about this, like tear bud is low. There's significant exposure. It stabilizes the tear film nicely. Like that's what we're trying to do. And if the glands are blocked or atrophied, then we can talk about not completely atrophied, but some atrophy. You might say, okay, well, how do I know the glands are blocked? Well, if you're measuring that blockage with a meibomian gland expressor or meibomian gland evaluator, or the glands have some atrophy but not all complete atrophy, then you could think about LipiFlow, tear care, iLux, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, depending on what you have in your office and what that patient specifically needs. So I think the Meibo, again, could be used as a standalone, especially in cases where there's complete atrophy. So we've gotten to it so late that we can't even do an expression-based procedure, or in augmented within a procedure, or if a patient denies a procedure. I think again, we're thinking about the underlying cause. And then Demodex, again, this is another big one. And if we're seeing collarettes or chronic lid inflammation that doesn't resolve, we might want to think about either, Demodex follicularum or Demodex brevis, which can live in the meibomian glands. And that should be on our radar. So, obviously our base of treatment, if we had chosen an eyelid scrub in step 1 that contains tea tree oil like Peak Pro does, then we may already be targeting some of that Demodex. But if we still have a problem on our evaluation, then we might be able to use something like Extemvi to target that treatment option that we didn't have before, and it's changed how we approach moderate to advanced cases. And again, for milder cases, maintenance, we often just keep those patients on a daily eyelid hygiene protocol with a tea tree oil-based cleanser and follow-up reminders when that needs to be consistent. So we've been there, prescribing a drop without a full workup just to get the patient out the door. But if that approach doesn't scale and it doesn't work for your practice, and it really won't, we're chasing just the newest thing. We're skipping documentation, and we don't have a clear plan from diagnosis to follow-up, and we're winging it. And winging it doesn't build trust. It builds unpredictability, and it builds lack of confidence for us. And that's why we think that we want to build a structure and a process for our clinic, from intake questions to the documentation to product recommendations. It's part of the care that we're providing. And if we don't have that yet, it's okay. If your practice doesn't have that yet, it's okay. But I would recommend building it. And honestly, that's exactly the kind of thing we work on with practice performance partners all the time, is helping ODs create systems that make this kind of care repeatable, teachable, and scalable for their patients primarily, and then secondarily from their practice. And so when it works, it looks like something like, a patient presents with evaporative dry eye and inflammation, and we start them with warm compresses, lid hygiene, artificial tears. We document it, we support the habit, and then we follow up with that patient intentionally. So we use the words, you've heard me say it here time and time again, I will see you back in 1 month. We do not leave it for the patient to decide whether or not it's bad enough to follow up with another appointment. We intentionally schedule an opportunity to follow up with that patient. If there's no improvement in signs and or symptoms, we escalate for IPL or Meibo or maybe both. We layer in maybe omega-3s to support tear film stability, and we think about systemic health. We use clear documentation to justify any prescription step, and we follow up reinforced eyelid hygiene. We track outcomes. And it's not complicated. It's just being consistent. And so that's what's really important to build trust with the patient. And then over time, it's not about selling the widget. It's, whether that's IPL or Lacrophil or tear care or, low-level light therapy, doesn't matter. Or even if it's Cequa or Xiidra or Extemvi. Patients just know we're not just throwing drops at the problem. They know we're working on a plan. So I think here's the big takeaway. If we want to succeed in dry eye care clinically and financially, we need to build systems that guide treatment, reinforce habits, and document everything along the way. So it starts with step 1 from the comprehensive exam, and then it grows with intention and pays off primarily for our patients and secondarily for our practices. And so if you need help building that structure, that's literally what we do at Practice Performance Partners. But even if you're just starting with one better follow-up protocol this week, that's progress. So I hope this was helpful. Thanks for joining me today. As always, reach out if you have any questions, and I'll see you on the next one.